Hi and welcome back to Bike Speeds. This week we're going to service this lovely Cannondale Supersix Evo edition. This bike as it stood is a death trap. It is literally waiting to have an accident and was very dangerous when it arrived. But we're going to service it up and sort it out. Look at this. You could not ride this bike. It is absolutely an accident waiting to happen. Look at these tyres. You imagine this on a bend with a little bit of gravel, delaminating, popping off, then not being able to rectify the inconsistency in the steering with that steerer being loose. Absolute accident about to happen this bike, and we're going to save it. You can see here the chain is not too bad. This bike was actually running on duraace. It was a very nicely spec'd bike, this one. It just needed finessing. We've got an awful lot of work to do with this one. But we're going to start here by taking the chain off, removing the wheels and taking the components off this bike, cleaning everything up, lubricating it nicely, absolutely getting it back to where it needs to be to run the miles and to operate correctly. So you can see the cassette, it's not too bad. Things were generally quite tidy on the surface of this bike, but it was deep down, deep in. We needed to do an awful lot of cleaning to make this bike work properly. We're going to remove the tail of the rear derailleur cable, and actually we're going to replace that outer there. That kink in the outer was actually cracking, so we're going to replace that outer. We're also going to clean this derailleur up. Lovely duraace derailleur, had a beautiful finish to it, very light, but boy did that need some work, and we'll show that as we go. This front derailleur, the cable was routed incorrectly. That would never have been correctly routed from the moment that cable was put on this derailleur, be that new in the factory or as a replacement at some point in its life. So we're going to make sure that that's routed correctly. We're going to clean this component up. You can see there it's not too bad. On the surface things were clean enough, but we'll get that deep cleaned and nicely lubricated as well. Same with the brakes. We're going to remove those from the bike. We have some cleaning and lubrication work to do on those, front and back. So we're going to take the front one off here. No problems with that cable. So we're not going to do that. We just pull that out and refit it when the brake goes back on. We are going to be shortening that steerer tube, so we need that front brake off for that. Next up, we're going to remove the chain set as well. We need to check the bearings are okay. We need to make sure everything in that bottom bracket area is as it should be. Cannondale actually have their own fitting here for removing these. It's a little bit of a fiddle, but it does work, and off comes that left hand arm there. And we'll just give that chain set a little tap out of the bearings, and then I can actually check those bearings. But this was the rear brake. You can see the outer there was broken. It's corroding. Again, you could pull the rear brake on and it just not release. So with them handlebars loose, the brake potentially failing, very dangerous bike to ride as it stood when it came in. But we'll get that cable out of the handlebars and we will replace that as we go with the service. So next up, I'm going to take off the handlebars. We are shortening the steerer tube so that we do away with those spacers on top of the stem. He wanted this lowered right down, so they come out now, and now we can start to think about shortening this steerer tube. This compression joint here, look at that, fell to bits in my hands. There should be an O-ring holding those four components together to that center bolt, missing. So we need to find an O-ring to sort that one out, and then we'll just take a little bit off the steerer tube, the spacings that were already above it. So we've done that now, and we'll just clean up the edge of that as well with a little file to make that a nice rounded edge. And you can see there a nice straight cut with our guide, and everything there is as it needs to be. So we're quite pleased with that. Now I'm also going to clean up the steerer tube, remove all the old greases and lubricants that are on there just to make sure that everything is safe there and no damage to that. And then we will sort out this compression fit in here with a new O-ring around there to hold that all together, which will just make it a little bit easier to bring it in and out of that steerer tube should it ever need to come in or out again. Torque that up, make sure that's absolutely spot on. I'm just using a little bit of our premium grease here on the seat for the bearing. That can just stop some of the little noise, little creaks that you may get, but you'd never want to overdo that grease. I do that with a nice thin layer of grease. I never douse it. I mean, you can see here in this cup it's thick with grease. It doesn't need to be like that. We're using our lovely syringe system here with our premium grease in it. You can buy those syringes on our website. We actually do a pack of 5 and individually 5 different greases for various different jobs. But in this instance, that was the premium grease that we used there on the bearings. On go the handlebars now. You can see we've got the height of that stack just absolutely perfect. That is now all sitting where it needs to be. We'll give these an initial tighten up on the stem. We will torque those up later on. So you can see here we use now ultrasonic cleaner to clean the chain and the cassette. We've put fresh solution in there to show you how it really draws the dirt out of these components. They didn't on face value look that dirty, but deep in, the rollers and the pins, very, very oiled up and greasy. So that really pulls that out. It's a lovely way of cleaning components like that. Now we're going to start on this rear derailleur. You can see a little bit of debris sitting on the cage there. The jockey wheels are coming out because these were thick with debris. This derailleur had done quite a bit of mileage without having a deep clean like this. Look at this grease thickness that comes off of those wheels. You're dragging your chain around that every single pedal stroke. It's draining away your wattage so that it doesn't deliver to the road all of that wattage. You're just draining it away on the components. So by cleaning your components, getting them nice and clean, having them serviced, it makes a huge difference to the delivery of your power to the road. And now I'm also going to wash down this derailleur. We never put any of these through the ultrasonic cleaner this time because they actually weren't too bad. With these components, we just washed these down with warm soapy water, dried those off with a microfiber towel and blew them out with an airline. That's all these components needed. They just needed a little bit of a freshen up. We're using our detailing brush there, nice nylon detailing brush. We actually do those in a pack of 5 with a couple of different sizes in there, and we use these a lot for this sort of work because it gets in nice and deep. Again, you can buy those on our website, so please do check that out. We'll put the link in the description below. That Cannondale chain set is a beautiful thing. I'll talk about that a little bit further on in the video. But we're also now going to wash off that degreaser off of the cassette, give that a little wash round again with our detailing brush, and then we're going to rinse off the chain. This was quite thick with grease in the links themselves, but that came up really, really nicely. Just a little bit of thread locker in the frame of the derailleur before we put the jockey wheels in. They're now nice and fresh. Put the pivots through the center. That thread locker will just stop those coming undone or causing any problems down the line with the derailleur coming apart, and that is now as it should be. And then we can actually think about lubricating these components. I always lubricate these thumb adjusters on derailleurs. They're notorious for bonding into the derailleur itself, but also these get very, very stiff, and the little plastic ring that goes on the outside can actually soften and break down because you're putting so much strain through it to actually turn it in the derailleur. So that's a component that you may use regularly through the life of the derailleur, so we want that to be right and we lubricate it accordingly. A little bit of our premium grease there on the spring for the derailleur to stop that going rusty, and we're using our general purpose oil on the pivot points of the derailleur, as you see there. They generally don't need lubricating, but it always helps. Same principle with the front derailleur, general purpose oil on the pivot points, premium grease on the springs, and that is now ready to be refitted and is looking very, very nice, having been cleaned down and had this lubrication done to it. And you always want to remember your brakes have pivot points as well, so make sure they're lubricated, especially that quick release. That's often one that will seize. And of course your skewers, they still have moving parts. The arm needs lubricating. The shaft itself, very, very prone to going rusty, can bond into an axle of a wheel or become very, very difficult to remove at the side of the road if you're having a puncture problem and you need to take the wheel out. So always make sure that you lubricate your skewers as well, which we do in every service that we do. Now we're going to go on to the frame. We didn't wash the frame down because it was very, very clean when it came in, but we are going to polish this. Now we're using our super resin polish. This won't affect the matte look of the bike at all. The paint is gel coated, so this won't change the finish or make it shiny in any way. But what it does do is remove all of those greasy smudges that were all over this white paint and very noticeable. None of them are really visible on camera, but there were grey marks that needed that extra power of the polish to be removed. I do hope you're enjoying this video. Please do hit the subscribe button. Do drop the video a like. It all helps with algorithms to get this video out to other people to watch. Next up, we're going to ceramic coat this frame. Again, no need to worry with this being a matte frame. This worked perfectly on this frame. This will protect that frame from that film build-up that it already had and will just help slow that process down and it's a lovely thing to do to your frames. You really feel like you've achieved and accomplished a beautiful finish on your frame by ceramic coating them. Now we're going to turn our attention to this wheel. So initially I'm washing it down, I'll check all the spokes, I'll check the rim itself, make sure that everything there is still safe and still okay to be used, and that the bearings feel okay. This wheel set has a green colouring on the logo to match the frame, which I think is a cool detail on the design of this bike. And now I'm going to put a little bit of our general purpose grease on the hub before putting the cassette on there. That will help that slide on. It will also help it slide off, so next time I come to service this bike, I know that I can get the cassette off relatively easily, and I will also torque that up to make sure that's the right spec. Now we're going to remove these very, very dangerous tyres that are on this bike. I wouldn't have ridden a mile on these tyres as they were. Very, very dangerous. We're replacing these with the Cannondale GP5000s. It's a tyre that we stock, and the customer asked for these specifically, so we'll remove this old tyre off of here and definitely put that one in the wheelie bin, and then we will fit this new Continental tyre on here. You always want to remember these tyres are a directional tyre. They rotate in one direction, and I always make sure the direction is correct, and then I will also line up the manufacturer's logo with the valve. That's just good housekeeping, not only from the point of view of being able to spot where punctures are, but from the point of view of presenting the bike to my customer. Everything will look absolutely spot on as it should be. So the tyre there is on, nothing left to do but to inflate that now, get that up to the right pressure, and then a new valve cap on there as well, just to make that present nicely again when it goes back on the bike. Next up, I've got to deal with this rear brake cable. The outer on that was absolutely life extinct, so we want to make sure that that is all sorted out and that it will run nicely and brake nicely. I just clean those handlebars up, and then we'll get a fresh outer in. So not only am I replacing the cable inside and the outer, we're making sure that everything there will actuate very, very nicely once the cable is done. Now with this bike, we actually reused the handlebar tape that was on the bike. That wasn't part of the brief for the service, so you'll see shortly that I'll actually refit that handlebar tape on there. But we have put a cable guide through the frame, so we've got the new stainless steel cable going in there through that guide, and now that's through to the back of the bike. I can actually retape these handlebars. A little bit of fresh tape around the end there, and that now is very, very nice. No reason why we needed to replace that handlebar tape. It's actually quite nice tape, and there was very little wear on it. Now I'm going to pop the chain set back in. I do love these chain sets. They're a one-piece construction. I don't know quite how they get both gear ratios in there, but there's no bolts holding cogs together. It's all one piece. These Cannondale chain sets are actually a work of art. I always enjoy working on these. They're a very, very nice chain set, these ones. So torque that up, and then we'll pop that freshly greased derailleur on the front there. Now I set that cable correctly underneath that top plate on that derailleur. It wasn't set correctly when it came in, and the tail was actually way too long, which was allowing it to come out of its set home position. Now with the front derailleurs, I always like to get everything in its set position, ready for adjusting, because obviously you've got a left and right shift pattern on those, so I like to torque everything up and make sure that it's all set where it needs to be on the frame before doing any adjustments. I'm putting a new outer on this rear derailleur here. This is one of the Shimano very flexible ones with a tube inside it. That was to replace the old one. It was just hanging the gear in when the bike came in, but once we put that on, it shifted very, very nicely once we finished the bike. A little bit of copper grease on the mounts for the brakes. They can often corrode into the frame, so I put a little bit of grease on there to help that from bonding into the frame, and so that next time I can take it off nicely. We'll just nip off that cable with our cable guide. That way we know our tails are all the same length. As you know, that's one of my favourite details to do in a service. That's the rear brake sorted. Now onto the front. You can see me refitting the cable now. In go the wheels. I'm pinching up the quick release, but not over tightening it, which is also something I see quite often. Then the final step is to lock that quick release, pop that lovely degreased chain back onto the bike. There's very, very little wear in that one, so that's got miles left in it. This chain didn't have a quick link originally, so I'm adding a new one here, as you can see, which isn't a bad thing to have added to the bike. And now I can start to adjust the gears. So A little bit of thumb adjuster work on the rear to start that shooting up the gearing. And then I had to adjust the B screw on this one. Now bear in mind, I haven't altered the chain, it's the original. This was never set up right from day one. So we've set that right. That will give a little bit more of a positive shift. By getting the B screw in the correct place, the shifting is far more precise. And then also the front there, you can see absolutely working perfectly. So I'm very, very happy with this bike. It's really coming together now. Check the brakes, make sure that they're central to the rim of the wheel, that they're pulling evenly both sides, left and right. And once that is all good, I can go through the bike with a torque wrench. Now look at these shifters. They are very, very loose. So with things like the B screw adjuster on the rear derailleur, things like these being loose, it really begins to paint a picture to me that this bike has been put together at some point by someone, certainly without a torque wrench and maybe without the full care and attention that it deserved at time of sale. It was just not quite right. You can see here the brake pads are loose. We have taken the brakes off, but we haven't touched those, so they were loose again from being put on the bike. But we're talking up all the fittings that we took off, checking others, things like these pedals, which we never actually took off the bike, but they're all okay. Seat post, that was okay. Brakes again, rear brake, I've had this one off, but again, look at that pad, a little bit of movement in there on the torque wrench. Same on this side. They needed torquing up. They clearly had never been done before, but we will also check the mount because we have taken that off. And the same with the rear derailleur. Obviously we've disturbed that, so we need to make sure that our torque settings are okay there. And then I also check the frame fittings. I don't do those with a torque wrench, but I do check those by hand to make sure everything's all right. And then we popped it off the stand to check the saddle. That was actually okay. And now I need to oil the chain. So a little bit of light lubricant, very, very thin lubricant I use on the rollers themselves, dabbing that on, letting it roll into the roller, using the microfiber towel to roll those rollers to make sure that chain is lubricated absolutely perfectly. And again, you can see from these before and afters, very, very subtle differences, but safety wise, this bike was dangerous when it came in, and now it is 100% safe, 100% lubricated as it should be, adjusted where it needs to be, ready to go on the new tyres, and absolutely spot on. So I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Bye for now.